Hello, it's Matt Lakelade. I want to share with you a real-life example of how to manage your territory and how I was in lockstep with my internal wholesaler. Kind of a business plan, if you will. And so how I came to this was in the early 2000s, they gave us BlackBerries, and then they bought the CRM Salesforce. So they invested this money into BlackBerries and Salesforce, and nobody was using it. So they said, well, you have to be scheduled 2 weeks out in Salesforce so your manager can see. And every time you leave a meeting, you have to put the meeting into your BlackBerry right after the meeting. And so obviously conspiracy theorists of wholesalers were saying, oh, Big Brother's watching, and so on and so forth. But I just said, well, okay, well, let's see, how can I put this together? And so this is the plan I came up with at that point. And then secondly, I would say maybe a year or two later, I was sitting there pondering and saying, why haven't I implemented everything I've ever been taught? Whether that be from Sequoia trainings when I was a wholesaler, any other sales book or training that I ever read. I said, why aren't I implementing these things? And then I came up with this plan, and here it is to you today for you to use in its entirety. So like I said, what I did is I broke out my territory into 6 different loops. Within those loops, I would have zones, but that's just the terminology I'm going to use here. And then I have my internal, me the external, I have an assistant, and then here is direct mail. All right, so let me explain. My internal and I would be in lockstep with scheduling and calling campaigns. So for instance, my internal in week 1 would be calling week 6, or loop 6 rather, where I just left. They'd be calling 2 weeks out to make sure I'm fully scheduled. And also, if they're calling and advancing the sale, it should be an, oh, by the way, Matt's going to be there, let's set up a meeting. And then they're going to backfill anything that might be open the next week, the next loop, meaning loop 2 that I'm going to be in. Me, obviously, I'm just running 25 meetings in loop 1. And then I had an assistant doing handwritten thank you notes. And they would always write thank you notes to the previous loop. And they would write thank you notes for business done the previous week. I think I gave you this on another video where I used to send out cards off of successories.com, and so with the motivational quotes on them. And then I'd do a direct mail piece, and now I probably would do direct mail a little bit more frequently, but then I did it once per every 6 weeks. I'd send out some kind of a trinket item. When I was at Axe, I sent out a bobblehead and things like that. We can share those another time. But I would always send out maybe a bigger trinket item. So let's keep going here. So now in week 2, loop 2, my internal would be saying thank you to loop 1. She'd be calling loop 4 to be proactive, and then backfilling any loop 3 if I had any openings for the next loop. And then I would be running meetings. My assistant would be sending thank you cards to the previous loop. And we just kept that formula going. So when I was in loop 3, my internal was saying thank you and calling the people I just saw the previous loop. She was calling 2 weeks out in loop 5, and then the next week she was filling in. Now, then when I was in loop 4, she was saying thank you, or doing follow-up calls for loop 3. She was being proactive to loop 6, and still proactive to loop 5, where I was going to be. And then when I was in loop 5, she was saying if you're doing follow-ups from loop 4, proactive to loop 1, and loop 6. And then when I was in loop 6, she was following up from 5, proactive loop 2, and proactive to loop 1, and the assistant was always sending thank yous to the previous loop. And so the idea there is, being in lockstep like this, I would 100% of the time schedule the next meeting when I was in that loop. So if I was in loop 1, I would say, okay, I'm going to be back in 6 weeks, same time this day, work for you. And I would schedule forward probably 15 meetings. So I'd be scheduled 6 weeks out with 15 meetings. And then my internal would fill in maybe 5 or 10 meetings to get me to that 25 level that I like to be at every week. And so I found being in lockstep like that, my calendar was always full, and I was always seeing the right people, and I was always seeing my ATLs. And then with my assistant following up, they were getting a lot of touches. So if you added this up, in 6 weeks, the amount of touches that somebody was getting, it's somewhere around 10 or 11 touches. So that's how you can be more effective in making sure you have a full calendar and that you're in front of the right people.